Let's break down one of the most confusing moments in any high-stakes deal, the complete collapse that happens after you get a yes. We're going to dig into the hidden forces that make perfectly good deals just fall apart, and how the best in the world build agreements that actually stick.
You know, it's a paradox that trips up even the most seasoned players. You fight for the agreement, you get the handshake, you think you've won, but that exact moment of consent is actually the point of greatest vulnerability. The deal isn't done, not even close. It's just entered its most fragile phase.
So, why does this happen? The common wisdom is just plain wrong. This isn't really about emotion. It's about a fundamental signal that almost everyone misses.
And this simple distinction reframes the entire problem. We're taught to see buyer's remorse as some kind of emotional flare-up, right? A sudden panic about the price or the commitment. But the reality is way more clinical. It's a signal that the deal itself was structurally flawed from the very beginning. The collapse isn't the problem, it's just the symptom of a much deeper issue.
This signal failure, it shows up in a very specific way. We call it the ownership gap. It's that dangerous space between someone saying yes and them actually, truly buying in.
And this leads us to the crucial concept of internal ownership. It's that feeling that a decision is yours. It's not something you were talked into, not something you were persuaded to do, but something you genuinely helped create. Without that, any deal is like a building with no foundation. Sure, it might look stable for a minute, but it's just waiting for the slightest pressure to completely crumble.
And once you see this pattern, you see it everywhere. In a B2B deal, your champion loves the idea, but they can't justify the spend to their boss. In hiring, the star candidate says yes, but then their mentor pokes a few holes in the logic, and they're gone. In an M&A, the leadership team agrees to the terms, but their people never feel like they were part of it, so they resist every step of the way. The context changes, but the physics of the collapse, they're identical.
And this is really the core insight. If they weren't in the room helping you draw the blueprints, they're not going to stand on the battlefield to defend the castle. Simple as that. A verbal yes is not the same as real commitment.
So this brings us to the real game being played. Every deal, once it's agreed upon, has to survive an internal trial. We call this the justification battlefield, and it's where psychology, internal politics, and incentives all collide.
You really only have two ways to get to yes. The standard approach is the unstable one. You push, you persuade, you get that signature, and then you just cross your fingers and hope for the best. The elite approach is the stable path. You co-create the solution with them. You help them pre-justify it to all their stakeholders, and only then do you lock in a commitment that's already been stress-tested.
And this is the one question that separates those two paths. Your real negotiation isn't just with the person sitting across from you. It's with that invisible committee they have to answer to next week. Their boss, their board, their team. If you don't arm them for that battle, you've already lost the war.
This means you have to fundamentally shift your role. You are not a persuader trying to smooth over every bump just to get a signature. No, you are an architect, guiding them to a conclusion and actively surfacing future friction right now in a controlled way, so you can solve for it before it blows up the whole deal later.
And a lot of the time, that friction, it's not even about the price or the terms. It's about coherence. Regret pops up when the deal clashes with someone's identity, or their team's culture, or just the company's established way of doing things. A deal that feels incoherent is a deal that's going to get rejected, even if the numbers on the spreadsheet look perfect.
So what's the tangible cost of missing this signal? Well, it's not just a lost deal. It's a complete unraveling of your position.
The anatomy of this collapse is painfully predictable. First, they go quiet. Your enthusiastic champion is suddenly getting hammered with questions they can't answer. Then they retreat to what's safe, the status quo, the vendor they already know. The internal veto from finance or legal stomps out their initial excitement. And if the deal isn't completely dead, you're forced back to the table, only now you have zero leverage. Your position is exposed.
Ultimately, this isn't a failure of tactics. It's a failure of perception. It's about fundamentally misunderstanding the game you're in. The goal isn't just getting to yes. It's about making that yes durable.
All right, so this brings us to the edge. How do elite negotiators operate differently? Well, they don't just secure deals, they regret-proof them from the very start.
The mindset shift here is profound. They completely stop thinking about selling a solution and start thinking about building an advocate.
Their primary goal is to turn the person across the table from a simple buyer into a true internal champion, someone who can carry the deal across the finish line and defend it long after they're gone.
And they do this with a very specific set of actions. They ask really direct questions like, how are you going to present this to your CFO? They map out the political landscape from day one. They don't just present the final slides, they workshop them with the buyer, turning the buyer into the presenter. And here's the crucial step. They make them articulate the value in their own words, because once they do that, it becomes their idea. It's now part of their identity.
This is the core principle of pre-justification. The deal's defense is built and ready before the attacks can even begin. It's been inoculated against the very doubt that destroys weaker agreements. So, let's end with 3 questions you can take with you to diagnose the actual strength of your own agreements.
First, how can you move beyond just getting a signature and start building a deal that is structurally designed to withstand that internal scrutiny? Second, are you making the classic mistake of confusing the temporary emotion of excitement for the much deeper, much more resilient structure of true commitment?
And finally, what does real internal commitment actually look like in your world? It's not a signature on a piece of paper. It's when your counterpart can articulate the why behind the deal even better than you can, because now it's their conclusion.